we had the opportunity to hear Dr. Hussain a couple of times earlier. And when he spoke last month at the roundtable that we organized jointly with FPCCI, it was an extremely stimulating and enlightening speech. And each time we hear him, he has something new to add to the perspectives. And I would request him to then please start with the speech.
First of all, let me thank ICRIER for inviting me again. I was here for the first distinguished lecture early in 2013, and now almost about a year I'm again back here. So I hope that I'm going to run out of new ideas at the frequency with which you are inviting me over here. Let me congratulate ICRIER for trying to establish a tradition which was badly needed as far as India-Pakistan economic relations were concerned, which is to bring about some kind of sanity through evidence-based analysis of issues emerging from the facts rather than just indulging in emotional outpourings, which has been the case for last so many years. So this is a very important contribution which needs to be sustained not only by ICRIER but by a group of institutions both sides of the border, and I'm very happy to be one of the institutions collaborating with ICRIER in this particular endeavor. We have been hearing too many unsubstantiated and untested assertions which create more confusion rather than clarify the issues. So for that matter, this initiative of ICRIER is extremely, commendable. I don't need to remind this particular audience, but just by the way of background, that trade and output growth are highly correlated. As a matter of fact, if you look at the long-term evidence of the last 5 decades, international trade has grown at twice as much rate as compared to the world output. Therefore, the economic theory and empirical evidence have now come to a very clear fact of life that if any developing country has to benefit from the accelerated economic growth and development, they cannot rely on domestic markets alone, but they have to be competitive to penetrate the international markets. And the case of China in this particular context is very interesting. It's a country of 1.2 billion people, and one would think this is a continent by itself. Why should they care for the rest of the world? And that was the Maoist tradition, that they wanted to remain inward-looking and thought that they will conquer the world. But the fact of life is that's only when China decided to integrate with the rest of the world and liberalize its economy and become a global player, they have today become the largest single exporting nation of the world. And where the trade GDP ratio in a market of 1.2 billion is 50% and more compared to 35% in the United States and other European countries. So that's a lesson which we have been, very much ignoring for a very long time. It is a matter of gratification that India woke up in 1991 and decided to follow the same path, which is of liberalizing and deregulating the economy and become a global player. Although the speed with which I would have seen India penetrating the international markets has not been that great, but it is a very different country altogether in 2014 compared to where it was when it was following an inward-looking command economy of the 1950s and 60s and 70s. So we are now in a stage where the internal reforms and liberalization have taken place, but they're not enough. And I'll come back to this particular issue. Now, within the trade liberalization, all the gravity models which you have seen and which are available in literature clearly show that the regional trade is an important ingredient in the contribution of trade towards growth. In South Asia, unfortunately, the two big countries, India and Pakistan, which constitute, India is about 80% of the GDP of South Asia. And that's why, unlike China, which is only 45% of East Asia, the predominance of India, therefore, becomes critical to the South Asia regional economic integration and cooperation. And the argument I have been making is that it has to be the Indian leadership which has to realize that they are at a very different platform as compared to the rest of the members of the South Asia. And they have to be more magnanimous and they have to be more generous because the damage and the harm of regional economic integration to India will be minimal because they are such a big player. And therefore, the benefits which will accrue to the rest of the countries, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan, would be disproportionately much higher. Therefore, this asymmetric relationship where the damage to India is limited while the benefits to the rest of the region are much higher makes a perfect sense for regional economic integration in this region, which is only less than 5% of its trade. And even sub-Saharan Africa today is growing its intra-regional trade. And those of you who are aware, there was a complete collapse of the Eastern African community between Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, and that community is now very much thriving in that region. So, we are also, because of the relationship between India and Pakistan on political side, are keeping the potential of the regional economic integration and trade hostage to this political tussle or tension. And the argument I have been making for the last 12 or 14 years, that this predominance of the political disputes for the last 6 decades has not really done us any good. It has actually retarded our economic potential. Why shouldn't we now change the sequence? And why shouldn't we bring in the dominance of the economic issues to the table through the economic cooperation, create constituencies within each country for others, and try that the political tensions and the heat between these two countries will be subdued or will be reduced. So it is a different mindset. It's not a tinkering of the existing paradigm, but this is a change in the paradigm itself, which is a change in the mindset. And unless we are prepared for that change in the mindset, you will have this erratic, developments which Nisha in her paper pointed out, that you have Sarbij Singh being killed everything goes down the drain. You have a cross LOC firing, everything goes down the drain. There is some incident, and these incidents are bound to happen. Under those circumstances, trade will never take off, because you are aware that trade requires a stable, predictable, continuous regime of policies and institutions. Because people have invested their money, they want to know how are we going to get a return which is comparable to the opportunity cost of that investment. Now, if they know that there may be another incident between the two countries and our returns are going to either disappear or they are going to be diluted, I don't think you will have many other people who will be taking the plunge. They will sit on the sideways and wait for the right moment to come in, despite all the potential which Nisha in her paper, Turab and others have pointed out. And I think I was very happy Mr. Rehan has actually substantiated with his modeling exercise what has been my intuitive conclusions about the India-Pakistan trade. It's not an MFN. It is not really the trade liberalization between the two regimes, or even of the free trade agreement with India and Pakistan. But it is the whole composite of the trade facilitation, and I will come to that, which will give this boost to India-Pakistan trade. And in that trade facilitation, I include the continuity, predictability of the economic policies and institutions within the two countries. I assign a very high weightage to that predictability. And this is linked with the foreign direct investment. No country in the world today is able to take advantage of trade, even not China, because trade has been accompanied by large inflows of the foreign direct investment. They create the stakes because they are linked with the markets abroad. The foreign investors who are coming in to exploit the comparative advantage of the recipient country, but their outlook is really linked to the destination markets. So this linkage between the foreign direct investment and trade is extremely integral part of this whole stimulus, which will be 5.6, 5.8 billion, who knows. And this requires that we create an environment in which the foreign direct investment takes place in both India and Pakistan for the purpose of promoting the India-Pakistan trade. And that brings me to this whole question, which Mr. Kher very rightly pointed out, and which is the evidence today all across, that end-to-end production technology is passé. It is no longer going to help us. When I talk to the textile tycoons of Pakistan, I say, why do you want to go from ginning to yarn to weaving to finishing to garments? Why do you want to do this? Because this is no longer the way you must have your production process. You find out as to which part of the value chain is going to be procured from the most comparative provider of that input supply.